Hi there, welcome to this second video in this series I'm doing about the greatest atomic players. This video will be about MoltenThinker, who was one of the very top players in the mid-2000s on both ITC and free chess. He still does play. He plays on Lee Chess under the name Smash Time Fools, and he gave a really interesting interview with chronological in April 2019, which I'm going to link to in this video and also in the study. And there he talks about how he got started in Atomic. He started playing Atomic in 2002, the same year that I started. But I believe he learned the game before me, which is why I'm putting in these videos in chronological order for players. I believe he learned the game before I did because he was generally ahead of me in strength, certainly in my early months. And I mean, it could be that he just picked up the game faster, but I believe he learnt the game before me. And he was a very talented player. I remember some of my early series I'd play against him and we would analyse afterwards, and it was quite clear that he saw the game very differently to other players who I would, at the time, the way to get better would be to play the strongest players you could and then analyse the game with them afterwards, try and get their thoughts about certain openings or about decisions being made in the games, and try and absorb that knowledge. And he would be talking about things to me like gaining space, giving a positional bind to your opponent, which were things no one else mentioned to me. I don't think anyone's ever said those things to me about Atomic. Well, maybe space, it's kind of maybe the fact you want more space is good, but generally I don't see people talking about space or binds, but he was, and that's the way he played as well. He used to play very aggressively with his pawns, try and create a lot of space, and then build up and then arrange his pieces behind those pawns for the kill. And we'll see that in some of his games coming up. I think his aggressive pawn play is something that, especially if you look at some, well, these days you call them older players, but other players that you'll see in this list potentially have learned, if not directly from him, then from players that have picked it up from him. And this is generally a way that a lot of players play. I see it in players like Anya Benz, for example, playing a lot with aggressively with his pawns as well. And he also valued quite highly things like activity and piece potential. And when analysing with him, it'd be clear that these were things that he valued quite a lot, as opposed to the more materialistic approach that I kind of gravitated towards and the chess kid had. And for example, this is probably shown in what's almost certainly his biggest contribution to atomic theory, which is this opening, 2d5 against the atomic attack, which is, well, it's one of the most important openings in atomic. And these days it's kind of, I suppose, played more out of necessity than the fact that everyone feels like, oh yeah, it's great to have a good, you want your piece potential and activity. There's so much theory on it now that it's kind of not really about that, it's just about what works these days. But back then it was 2e6 was the main move, and it was considered fairly safe. Like we're talking early 2000s. It wasn't until 2004 that people actually even discovered that there was this tactic, the hook tactic. Experienced players will know what I mean, but it's basically white jumps in with his knight and then goes for this queen manoeuvre into b6, following these moves. And if you can imagine, I mean, this took a long time for anyone noticed this tactic existed. It's not something that you look at the position after 2e6 and think, oh yeah, I'm going to give up a knight and then move my queen to b6. It actually took years. I'll say 2004. I mean, Atomic had been around since 1995. So that's nearly 10 years it took before anyone figured this out. So 2e6 was seen as quite a safe move. Of course, there are other ways of attacking 2e6, but generally 2e6 was quite safe. There wasn't that much theory, and even in those days he was playing 2d5 because he didn't care. He knew that he was sacrificing material, but he liked the activity he was getting, and that was kind of the way he approached Atomic. He played similarly against other openings like knight h3. There's a game actually in this study where you played like this and then sacrificed the pawn. Later on, I won't go through it in this video, but there's a game here if you're interested against Vicheskid, which he played in the 2005 ICC Championships. And yeah, so the way he looked at the game was quite different, and that approach, valuing activity and piece potential, I think contributed towards something else which he was very good at, which was basically swindling. He was certainly in his best years, sort of 2005, 6 and 7, I'd say the best swindler in the game. These days I think that mantle's been sort of taken on, certainly in public opinion, by Fast Tsunami. I think generally just very skillful players are good at generating tactical chances, and he was certainly one of those players who had a better feel, I think, for activity and the initiative than other players did, and that's why he was successful at swindling people. You know, people would get a material advantage against him, and probably an objectively winning position, but he would understand how to win the game regardless, and how to set up chances to win the game, and in 1 minute games, which was, you know, his speciality. Of course, it's not easy to counter that kind of thing when you've got to think. You can easily blunder and lose, and it happened very regularly. I have mentioned his aggressive play with pawns, and I think we'll come up to that looking at some of his games. But one other thing to mention about him was that, you know, even in those years where his best years, he was certainly in that group of elite players, but he was generally not so consistent. So compared to every other player I'm probably going to mention in this series, he was the most erratic. He would be able to beat anyone on his day, but he could also just turn around the next game and lose against someone who you really wouldn't expect him to lose to. And these erratic results meant that, you know, he was generally not consistent enough to be challenging in terms of top rating spots, at least not on a consistent basis. You know, players like the Chess Kid and myself, active on ICC, and then later on, you know, again myself, Siggy Mannon, Wild Killer or Peter-Patzer, they were more consistent than he was, and able to beat up on low rated players like more consistently, and that meant that, you know, you get higher ratings from doing that, right? So he wasn't generally challenging on the top spots of rating, but that ability to be able to beat anyone on his day meant that, you know, he was very dangerous in tournaments, and particularly the ICC Championship, which was played at a 1+0 time control. He won 4 tournaments in a row, or 4 years in a row, I should say, which was just quite an incredible result, really. And he, you know, I played in a few of those, or at least a couple anyway. I can't remember exactly how many. And the Chess Kid played in a number. Peter-Patzer would have played in most of them too. And yeah, so to win those consistently, considering the fact that they were based on a large number of games as well, those tournaments, you had to play against your rivals multiple times, unlike in the fixed championships where I think it was just a 5-round Swiss, where, you know, if you were white or black against your main rival, it was just complete luck. And only 5 games, you know, if you lose with black against your main rival, you don't get another chance to play them, and that could be it, that's the tournament done. While this one was, you played lots of games, so generally the player who was playing best on the day wins. And yeah, 4 years in a row, it's not to be sniffed at. Very impressive. So if we kind of move on to the next section I'm going to look at here, basically there's MoltenStudios. So MoltenThinker, he had a website which he set up in 2005 called MoltenStudios. I'll put a link to that website as well. And in that he had lots of different interesting sections, and first one I'm going to take you through some of the tactics that he gives on this, a couple of example tactics, and then a few puzzles which I might leave for you to have a go at. But he's got a lot of interesting stuff on that website, so it's definitely worth checking out. I'll talk about some bits from it in this video, but certainly the tactics is quite nice. Here it's white to play and win. This is a game against myself, and this is actually quite a common idea. The correct answer is Queen D3. White attacks along this diagonal, and after F5 switches to this other diagonal and wins the game. And this is often overlooked, this sort of queen switch, even by strong players. I mean, clearly, I missed it in this game and wasn't alert enough, and you can often win lots of games that way. Another one, so this is white against the chess kid, so bishop d3. MoltenThinker mentions h6 as being the best move here, which it is. But the chess kid plays a very tempting move, knight to e4, opening up the rook, and it's white to play and win. And the move is bishop h6, a very common trick, and following up with queen h5 into f7, and white wins. Black resigned in this position. And finally, another one against the chess kid, black to move and win. And the move is bishop to a3. Hopefully I'm giving enough time. I'm just giving a bit of time after, just to if you want to pause the video and try and solve them. But these ones are just examples. Anyway, so bishop a3, you attack b2 and d2, and after that move, white resigned. So there's a few puzzles here. I'll just put it on for a few seconds on each one. If you want to pause it and have a go, you can. Or if you want, and then you can go to maybe to the study and try and check your answers. But so this is the first one, black to play and win. So white to play and win. And then again, white to play and win. These are all puzzles again from MoltenStudios, his website from 2005, and he also has on there a number of other things. A particularly interesting section called Multi Madness, I think it's called, or Molten's Madness, which goes and talks about his conversational style, which if people don't know him or haven't spoken to him much, they won't know this, but he has got a very interesting way of chatting, which is quite unique. He talks very poetically and using interesting phrases, and on there he's got a list of a lot of his phrases and the way that he likes to talk. He also talks about that in his interview that I mentioned earlier, how he built up this conversational style. I remember he used to say a lot of things to me. He used to refer to me as a video game. He used to like saying, oh, he wants to play his video game, when it basically meaning he wants to play me some games. I'm not sure if that's a reference to predictability and by moves or what exactly that meant, to be honest. But he used to like playing his video games, so win or lose, he used to enjoy it. And he also used to be quite. I think at the time I used to get quite frustrated with him back in my kind of early years, because he used to frustrate me a lot. I think a lot, even to this day, I've got this dislike of kind of mindless flagging, if you like, completely drawn positions, just flagging. And I think this comes from some of these matches, but I'm sure he used to do that quite a bit. Part of his strength was that he was quite a fast player, and he used to be very good at 1 minute. And yeah, he'd flag me quite a lot in positions where I kind of feel like, well, the game's finished. But that's part of the game, I suppose, in 1 minute, and part of the reason why I actually started playing with increment a lot of the time. I just didn't like it. And he also used to set up a lot of duplicate accounts. I remember, and troll me, like when because at those times it was quite hard to find games of Atomic. You have to put out a seek, and then you just wait for someone to accept it. And often, some low-rated player would sort of accept it and then play like MoltenThinker against me, and it'd be kind of obvious that it was him. Also because of the way he would talk in the chat, very unique style of chat, and just insist, oh no, I don't know who MoltenThinker is. Which, looking back, is kind of amusing, like this sort of trolling he used to do on me. But at the time, sometimes it used to kind of get on my nerves quite a bit. But yeah, it's funny. We're both teenagers at the time, quite young, and yeah, look back on it kind of fondly, really. And my main thought about looking back on those times is analysing with him and being struck by how differently he looked at the game. And so I'm going to look at one of his games. This is a game that he put on his website. So game from 2005. It was a 1+0 game, so 1 minute game against Peter-Patzer, who in 2005 was emerging as a bit of a force in the atomic world, still rising, I think, but getting stronger and stronger all the time. And yeah, it kind of shows his typical style, I think. So knight f3, f6. It was also played at a time when his ICC years and 2005, which he kind of mentions specifically to me as a time he felt was his best time and his strongest time in Atomic. So MoltenThinker is white, and this line with g3 is one of his kind of pet systems. He's played this many times. And I'm going to read out some comments. So these are comments that MoltenThinker's made on the game himself. He says, it's unclear whether the in-between move bishop g4 is good for black. The idea is to delay queen h5 traps by one tempo. So again, blocks in this queen. I think e5 is perhaps a little bit more natural here, but e6 to me doesn't look too unnatural, but it does give up a little bit of space. And Molten's next comment is kind of interesting. I remember being quite struck by it when I first read it, all those years ago. He says, here white has a massive space advantage. White can attack in the centre or the king side, but first they must secure the queen side. So describing this as a massive space advantage, I remember being quite struck, being like, really? I mean, okay, it's a small space advantage, right? It's not massive. But you clearly valued, I think, having these pawns and limiting the queen side quite a lot. And he follows it up with pushing to c4 as well. Really like kind of trying to cramp black in. A few more moves are played, and now he plays the move c5, again gaining even more space. And he says here, black had the chance to play that move, meaning c5. Now their counterattack chances have been greatly diminished. So basically saying black should have played c5, but he didn't. And now he likes white even more. And I think describing this as being a huge advantage for white is perhaps an exaggeration. I think white is definitely better. I'd much rather be white. And I think practically speaking, it's probably bigger. The advantage is probably bigger than it is objectively. But yeah, black should still be playable here, I'm sure. But knight c7, a4, a5, b5. He says it's unclear whether white needed to make that push. Perhaps it was better to attack right away, say with h4, e5, f4, or queen d2. Again, I'm just reading these. These are quotes from Molten himself, made at the time. So this is no computer analysis or anything, just thoughts and feelings from a top player at the time. So b5 is what he did play. Takes, knight a3, knight b5. Now here he does say perhaps a takes b5 was better, but it is more risky. And I think that's true. I think knight takes b5 really keeps the status quo, right? It keeps this pawn structure intact. And Peter-Patzer plays b5. And one thing I just want to point out, I'm not gonna. This is the only game I'm going to go through in this video. But I did search for a number of other games. I went through maybe 100 games of Molten's wins, 100 of Molten's wins against top players. And I picked out my 4 that I kind of felt were, quite nice wins in his typical style. And he also has another game here where, he annotated against Vicheskid, but these 4 have kind of comments from myself. And one of them, I think it's the first one. You can see it's the same opening. He played the same opening, and if we scroll forward to when I played b5, you'll see that this structure on the queen side looks kind of familiar, right? I mean, it's played in 2011, so it's 6 years after the first game. But very, very similar. And I've also noticed that he's got games even from recent years, the last couple of years, playing in exactly the same way. I mean, he's still playing this way, and it's still proving successful. Still squashing players with this aggressive positional approach. So he pushes the pawn to c6, queen c7, queen c2, and he blocks his pawn. And so he blocks the pawn a square foot higher up than black's managed to block his, so giving him a little nice space advantage. The game continued, rook fb8, c1, bishop f8, perhaps covering this rook c5 move, or that perhaps was the idea. Molten decides to exchange and now plays rook c5. And this is a moment I just want to kind of pause for a second and just, what would you play for black here? It's a bit of a puzzle. So I'll assume basically at these points, if you want to have a go, then you can pause it. But the right move is actually queen takes c6, kind of a black missed this tactical opportunity, and so did white. I mean, rook c5 was actually a mistake, Now black gets at least a draw because of the open c file. A rook will exchange and then black will get a perpetual check. So for example, rook c1, exchange the rook. White wants to try and crash through, but there's not enough time. Has to create some luft, and then he is being checked to draw. But instead of all this, white really shouldn't have played rook c5. He should have perhaps built up the position further. Perhaps, you know, a move like e takes d5 might even be a possibility here, or just perhaps slowly advancing some of these pawns might be interesting as well. But rook c5, you know, it's a 1 minute game, remember. These players are just playing on instinct, and Peter-Patzer plays rook b6. And taking on a5 here, you know, allows rook takes a4, and the tactics actually works out to a draw in that variation, which is actually analysed by MoltenThinker in his comments to the game. You know, black pushes his pawn, but then it ends up being a draw. You know, the rook will just check. I think he gives them a queen c8 actually, but then, you know, this will end in a draw, like as such. I think white probably should have kept, you know, h4 I think is a very nice move here, keeping the pressure up. But Molten played rook b5, and again I want to have a little puzzle here. What should black play? And black missed a chance. Black played in the game, he played rook takes b5, which I think is a natural move. I think most people in a 1 minute game would probably play that move. But he missed the chance to play queen g7, and this essentially wins for black. Queen h6 is threatened, and also rook takes c6. So if white pushes this pawn, then queen h6 wins the game, while if h4, you know, a move too late, then black wins quite clearly here too. But I suppose that's quite a tricky move, and I think after rook takes b5, black misses his second chance, a tricky chance, but he doesn't get another one after that. He takes d5, rook d8. White is kind of looking to kind of push this pawn through. White makes the important move king h1. He just doesn't want to, I guess, allow any checks after pushing the pawn to d5 or on b6, just in case. You know, why allow it, right? Why allow it to be checked? So useful prophylactic move. And Molten makes a comment. White's plan is clear: removal of the e6 pawn, and so he's going to try doing that for playing d5, right? So Peter-Patzer plays rook d5, trying to just kind of blockade the position. White plays f4, slowly advancing his pawns. h4, g4, controlling all these squares. And black's just completely lost really. So he plays f5. Rook e1, attacking e6 in another way. Black played f takes g4, and then rook takes e6, and white won. If instead black moved the rook back, probably slightly more tenacious, but d5, I mean, it's just completely winning for white anyway. And after rook takes e6, the game's over, and white won. So before ending the video, I did want to mention a couple of other things that I found on his website, which I thought were kind of nice little, I call them nuggets on here, interesting nuggets that he has on his website, which kind of struck me at the time. I remember this one in particular from when I looked at it many years ago. Black can play rook b7, and white's got these two connected passed pawns, but having a rook on the 7th is an incredible defence against two connected passed pawns. Whichever one queens, both pawns get exploded. And I remember thinking this was quite nice and trying to come up with some kind of studies around how to, or puzzles, how to end, you know, with this being kind of like the final punchline in a study. And I haven't seen it in many games. I've seen it in maybe a few, and I think I've seen players fail to use this defence. But it can arise, like for example, let's say black had a rook at f8, right, and white had maybe a bishop at h6 or some piece and captured this, and then you could end up in a situation like so. But it's quite rare, but really kind of nice one to have in the arsenal of ideas. And the final one was just a really kind of funky position, which is kind of interesting in that it's just played against a computer account called Spazzer, and looking these days, I mean, you can't really blame Spazzer for thinking that White was winning here. So Molten makes the comment, this position actually happened in a live game. The computer had decided that it would be wonderful to join the kings and then break them apart after it has promoted a few more queens. But apparently it isn't happening. Black rook moves back and forth from f7 to f8. And that's all there is to it, really. I mean, this rook just moves back and forth on these two squares, and White cannot make any progress. It's kind of an interesting formation, like with these pawns on h7, h6, and the rook on f7. Absolutely nothing White can do. You push this pawn up, you get a queen, then you perhaps get another queen. Still, absolutely nothing. Nothing you can do. You can't shift that rook or get to the king. So yeah, kind of like a nice little position to end on. But yeah, so if you want to see more games from MoltenThinker, the legend, then there are a few games I've picked out here. I went through perhaps 100 games to pick out the best ones that I could find, but he has got thousands and thousands of games, which I didn't go through even 10% of his games, probably like 1% of his games, in order to get these. So he's got even just on Fixed Games, which is a site for finding games, he's got 1,333 games against Crown Lapin. He's got over 800 games against Fast Town Boy, which is Fast Tsunami. So he's got many games against top players, which I didn't get through, but I'm sure of a treasure trove of interesting tactics and ideas. But these 4 games I think quite well demonstrate his style, particularly the way he likes to play aggressively with his pawns. These last two I think, or I think there's 2 of them in there. I'm not sure if it's the last 2 or not, but there's certainly this one. This was another opening speciality of his that he used to have, pushing his pawn to g4 to try and block in the bishop on h6, which is a very interesting approach, and one that he used successfully. And the other games, I think there's another one here with g4, a similar push, and then a couple of games. This one was quite similar to the one we looked at, this line he likes with the move g3. So yeah, have a look through those games if you like his style and perhaps want to try and learn a bit more about this aggressive pawn play style. But I'll leave it here for this video, and many thanks to MoltenThinker for all the great games over the years. Really enjoyed them, and yeah, hopefully we'll play again sometime.